Today, we meet the gospel with a familiar verse. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. This turns out to be Jesus' response to a trick question. It was posed to him by the Pharisees. They wanted to see whether or not Jesus would acknowledge the governing authority of the Roman Empire. And that's what I want to talk about today. Authority. But not as mediated through economic power, but rather as punctuated by the mercy of God. That's what we're going to track, the word mercy. And here's where we'll find it in the gospel. Mercy is revealed in that moment in which the Pharisees are amazed. Today, my hope is that you will leave this Sunday morning service amazed as well. I'm going to start by quoting the Bible. For the Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. And again, God is merciful. God's loving kindness is everlasting, and his faithfulness endures from age to age. And again, for the Lord delights in mercy more than sacrifice. And again, so go and learn what this means, Jesus says. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And again, so be merciful, as your Father in heaven is merciful. And finally, for mercy triumphs over judgment. Those are all Bible quotes about the mercy of God, and they are amazing. So now let's return to the gospel and hear how we arrive at amazing. The Pharisees have tried to trap Jesus, as I said a moment ago, in a scenario in which he subjugates the Jewish law in favor of the Roman authority. So what does Jesus do? We know this story well. He asks the Pharisees to produce a denarii, which they quickly do right out of their pocket. And they hand it to Jesus, and he calls them hypocrites. Now here's the context. It was against the law, the Jewish law, at the time to use Roman tender for economic transactions. And yet the Pharisees, on the spot, right, could produce a denarius. And Jesus calls them hypocrites. It's a great word. You know what it means? Two-faced. As in the Pharisees with one face show themselves as adherents to the Jewish law while simultaneously violating those laws for their own economic benefit with the other face. Two-faced. You with me? Ironic. It is so obvious, isn't it, to us, right? Other people's hypocrisy is always so obvious to us. I'm an expert on other people's hypocrisy. Jesus responds to them with give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. And when they hear this, they are amazed. Now this word amazed is interesting. If you trace it through the gospel, you find that when it shows up, it marks a moment in time when there's clarity of seeing. When hypocrisy for personal perspective or power or priority or preference falls away, and it reveals the mercy of God. With mercy defined as compassion and forgiveness shown towards someone for whom it is within the other's power to punish or harm them for what they have done. We'll engage that definition again in a little bit. Jesus, in that moment, did not sneer a gotcha, nor did he give them a I'm smarter than you look. It's probably what they expected. But rather, they saw in the face of Jesus, in that moment, the mercy of God. And they were amazed. They saw in the face of Jesus the same gaze that Jesus gazed upon the woman who was about to be stoned for adultery. The same gaze Jesus gave to the rich young man who went away. The same gaze that Jesus gave to the man possessed with a demon or those who had leprosy. The same gaze upon which he saw the disciples and his very good friends, Mary and Martha and Lazarus. The same gaze that he gave to Herod and Pontius Pilate and Judas. See, the gaze of God is always the same. It is singular, singularly faced, no hypocrisy, only mercy. Are you with me? See, it must be that way. It must be that way. For if God is God, follow my logic here, okay? If God is God, and God made all things, and God made all people over all time, and if God sees all activities, from the daily routines of our lives to the activities that we shelter in shame, to the thoughts that cramp and clog our better judgment, to the passions we allow to inflame us through the words of someone else, if that is what our God sees in you and me, and we are still here, then clearly mercy is that which God employs. For mercy is compassion and forgiveness shown towards us by a God within whose power it is to punish us, and yet does not. And since we believe that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, then we can be assured that the gaze upon which Jesus sees the world is through the lens of mercy. It must be so. And that's what the Pharisees saw. That's what they saw in that moment. Not a sneer, not a I gotcha. What they saw was mercy. There was no duality. There was no hypocrisy. There was no anger. There was no judgment. There was no retribution. There was only mercy. And the Pharisees were amazed to see singularly in the face of Jesus the mercy of God. This perspective on mercy is wonderfully represented in a book by C.S. Lewis. Any of you heard of C.S. Lewis? That's it? Just half of you? That's for the people online. They're like, what? A great book C.S. Lewis wrote called Till We Have Faces. Some of you may be familiar with that book. It was the last book that he wrote, though he claimed that it had been rolling around in his head for 35 years. It is the retelling of the Greek myth of Cupid and Psyche. So let me share with you now a little overview. There are two sisters in a mythical kingdom called Glome, and the older sister, Aurora, betrays her younger sister, Psyche, causing Psyche to, seemingly, be cast out from under the protective care of the mountain god. And after the mountain god casts Psyche out, he turns to Aurora and says, "You too are Psyche." Now, when Aurora returns from that mountain back to her kingdom, shortly thereafter she becomes queen. And she spends the rest of her life tirelessly working for the benefit of her kingdom as a way of penitence for the wrong that she felt she did to her sister, believing the mountain god's pronouncement, "You too are Psyche," meant the destiny of her life was to be shrouded in suffering. Now, in the end, the sisters are reunited. And together they encounter the mountain god, who says again to Aurora, "You too are Psyche." Only now, at the end of her life, she realizes that this pronouncement was not a curse of suffering, but an insight to the mercy of God. For Aurora had now learned that after her sister Psyche was cast off the mountain, she romped through the world, doing the most incredible things, knowing all along that she was living under the loving gaze of a merciful God. For God delights in mercy more than sacrifice, and as such, mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy is amazing. And that is the insight that some of the Pharisees perceived when they looked into the face of Jesus. Okay? So last Sunday, we talked about putting on the soul robe. Did any of you remember that? Choir? I know you were here. You're wearing the soul robe right now, aren't you? And so are you. This week, I want to invite you to put on the glasses of mercy. You with me? Good for you, Zach. Because these glasses of mercy are fitted with lenses that allow you to see the soul robe that is worn by the other person. Right? It allows you to see that everyone is wearing a soul robe, whether they know it or not, whether they believe it or not, whether they're acting as if they do or not, matters not, because everyone is wearing a soul robe. Who's wearing a soul robe? Come on, everybody. Right? If you are, then you are a soul. If you were born and are breathing right now, you are a soul experiencing the mercy of God right now. And we are called to put on the glasses of mercy, which allows us to see the souls as God sees them. Like Jesus, mercifully gazing upon the Pharisees, and they were amazed. Like Jesus, mercifully gazing upon King Herod and Pontius Pilate and Judas, and they were not amazed. And yet, God remains merciful. God has power over all people, you and me as well. And God has mercy upon us because God has birthed us into the world to be amazing. Amazing as we acknowledge and hold to the mercy of God. Amazing to put on the glasses of mercy, to be amazing, to be soul seers. Soul seers in this broken world, to be amazing. Can we be amazing? Can we represent the mercy of God? I know that I can't do that on my own. It is too much. But I can within the embrace of this church. Human to divine over time as an institution of hope. It is possible as a community to hold all merciful points of view. We can't, most of us, at least I can't, do that singularly, seeing through the lens of mercy. I can't do it at all times and in all contexts or for all people. It is too much, but together we can. Right? Together we can. It is our duty and our destiny to do so, to be soul seers. Are you with me? Because that's going to enable us to see the soul of every single child in Gaza, to see the soul of every wailing mother in Israel grieving their families. It'll give us the capacity to see the soul of every IDF fighter and every firebrand politician pounding the podium in the Knesset. It allows us to be soul seers of the fighters in Gaza and the bone-weary nurses in makeshift hospitals. To see the souls of the guilty and to see the souls of the innocent. For they are singularly and simply. They are singularly and simply because of God's mercy. We are here by the mercy of God. This isn't just Bible stuff. It's not just fiction stuff. It can actually play out in the real world. And it has. Cast your mind back to 1996, when Archbishop Desmond Tutu established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And every day in and day out, month in and month out, year in and year out, he and others would listen to the stories over and over and over again, the banal stories of evil done by so many against so many. And it was done because the perpetrators could not see that the other person was wearing a soul coat. But Tutu is a Christian, chosen to be a Christian, like you have chosen to be a Christian. But Tutu, by putting on those mercy glasses, bound himself to the church, an institution of hope, to fortify him, to see the soul robes worn by the perpetrators of the apartheid horrors. And because Tutu wore the glasses of mercy, he did not seek to other the criminal. He did not dehumanize them. He did not isolate them as they had done to him. Rather, he gazed upon them with mercy, as Jesus gazed upon the Pharisees holding the denarii, and they were amazed. And so I'll end now by saying that in our own small way, the world needs us to be amazing right now. As an institution of hope, it is our duty and destiny to be pews full of amazing people, bespectacled with the glasses of mercy. And while it's very difficult for each one of us to be merciful in every situation, in every context, to every person all the time, together we can be. Together we can see the entire world as Jesus does, through the mercy of God.